The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. I install cable for a living. My last job has me rethinking my career choices. My hands are trembling to the point where I've had to restart this several times. I'm a guy who doesn't scare easily, but this encounter has me shaking like a hit dog. I'm still sitting in my work truck, trying to work up the courage to step outside again. Worse, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to tell my boss what happened. I was already on thin ice with him, and this shit might cause me to break through to the freezing water below. But fuck it, because this was weird. I install cable for a living. I didn't have dreams of stringing cable when I was a little kid, but my previous life choices left me with few options. In high school, I fell in with the wrong crowd. It started with skipping school, sneaking alcohol at weekend parties, and some petty theft, but it didn't stay that way for long. Soon, I dropped out and dedicated my life to committing robberies to pay for my pill addiction. I wasn't living as much as I was running on a treadmill. I did whatever I could to stay on my feet, but constantly felt myself slipping. My bottom came when I was jumped by two guys who sold me pills. I had bought from them before and trusted them, but the feeling was not mutual. Someone had dimed a buddy of theirs out to the police, and he was looking at real jail time. They assumed it was me and beat me senseless. I was greeted at the door with a punch to the jaw that sent me reeling. My brain, already addled and slowed by oxy, was in the middle of putting together what was happening when the next punch caught me in the temple. I collapsed to the ground and covered my neck and face as best as I could. The next few minutes were a flurry of punches, kicks, and stomps. When it was all over, I had a broken jaw, a shattered wrist, several wounds that required 50 total stitches, and a concussion. That's how I kicked my painkiller addiction. I can joke now, but the next 6 months were the hardest in my life. The withdrawals I had were the worst thing I've ever experienced. Having them while I was recuperating from my injuries was a circle of hell I didn't think existed. I wanted to die most days and felt lost in the darkness, but sobriety was the beacon on the horizon. Even during my darkest moments, I could still see the fuzzy spark of white light off in the distance. It kept me going. 6 months from my beatdown day, I came out the other side, healthier but weaker. I needed a job, but had limited skills. Thankfully, I had a former pill buddy who managed to keep steady employment with the cable company. We always got along, and he called in a few favors and hooked me up. I got hired, but it was a struggle. Not the work, which was easy to learn, but dealing with the public without telling them to fuck off. Worse was trying to avoid the flood of illegal substances that are around you at all times. Customers will offer you weed or pills for all the channels, or bored co-workers will have something to make the day pass by. It's a lot to dodge, especially if you're in recovery. Whenever I felt the itch again, I'd feel the scar tissue from my wrist surgery, and the itch would pass. The last week has been one of those shit, is it Friday yet? Weeks that seem to be growing in frequency these days. I don't want to bore you with the details, but needless to say, most nights I needed to reach out to my sponsor and have them talk me off the ledge. We recently had a turnover at the executive level, and my new boss Rory was a tremendous cock, a rager at levels science hasn't ever seen before, just the worst dude imaginable. Part of Rory's new crusade was coming in and firing a bunch of guys. The company called it checking for redundancies in the labor force, but we all knew what it was. He was picking off two classes of people, high earners and guys with spotty pasts. I was in the latter group and imagined it was just a matter of time before my number got pulled. I was on pins and needles all week. I made sure I was the greatest cable installer you'd ever meet. So far, I was getting high marks, but the forced joviality was wearing thin. It's safe to say my joy had left on a one-way ticket. I have no clue when or if she'd return. Back to this shit. I had just finished up my last job of the day when my work phone started buzzing. I cursed and thought about not answering, but the threat of unemployment loomed too large for me to do that. I picked up and knew from the jump my day was far from over. Denise from dispatch asked if I could cover a job left hanging because of scheduling conflicts. See, the original installer had been let go. It was near where I was and was a simple install. I gritted my teeth and agreed. I liked Denise and knew she was worried about the hammer falling on her, too. She thanked me profusely and promised to bring me cookies tomorrow, since she's a hellcat in the kitchen and getting close to a dispatcher never hurts. I said no worries. I hung up, balled up my jacket, and screamed into it. I felt better after that. 981 Maple Street was about 5 minutes away, but it felt like a world away. Maple Street was at the end of the neighborhood where large swaths of grass fields faded into a thicket of woods. The woods rose up into the foothills until they graduated to mountains. To borrow a phrase from Shel Silverstein, the house resided where the sidewalk ends. The house, an off-white birdhouse ranch type, was a little run down, but no worse than any of the others that populated this neighborhood. This place had been hit hard by economic times, and property values had plummeted. It was slowly recovering. In 5 years, this would be a place most current residents wouldn't be able to afford. The front yard had a large oak tree that looked amazing, but had killed the grass under its canopy. The rest of the yard looked well cared for. I knocked and heard a few voices talking on the other side of the door. It opened, and a man in his late 40s stood there with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand. He was tall and thin, save for a middle-aged paunch. His face was starting to crinkle at the edges, but he was Southern California middle-aged, which meant he was holding up pretty well. He did look tired, though the bags under his eyes were full-on steamer trunks. "You with the cable company?" he asked, knowing I was. I nodded. "You requested an install, right?" "Yes, I did. Please, come in." He opened the door wide, and I walked in. The house was pretty bare with a bachelor pad aesthetic. That didn't make much sense since I heard a female voice talking to him. I assumed it was his wife. I believe in a lot of wild shit. But to think that a wife would be fine with their house decorated like a 23-year-old bachelor lived there was a bridge too far. "I'm Tom," the guy said, extending his hand. I shook it. "What did you need from my end?" "Do you know if there was a previous hookup here?" Yeah, there is one in this room and another in the back bedroom." "Okay, I should put the modem in a spot that'll hit the whole house. The signal can get wonky if it's in a room behind a wall or bricks or anything." "This room is probably the best spot then," he said. "Perfect. I have to get under the house, check the old connections, and replace some parts. Where's your hatch to get under the house?" "Oh, it's around back. You can exit out this side door and walk through the backyard. It's on the eastern side. You might need a screwdriver to remove the grate. Do you need one?" I pulled a screwdriver from my pocket and showed him. "I should be good. Thank you. Though, I should have guessed you'd have one. I appreciate your concern. Is there anything in the backyard I should be worried about? Dogs? Kids? Wild dogs? Wild kids?" It was standard banter, and it always got a chuckle out of people. "Same thing happened here. Nothing to worry about," he said. "You should be good. All right, I'll get started so you can get online as soon as possible." "Great. If you need anything, I'll be doing some work in the back bedroom." I nodded and headed for the side door. The dining room door led to the pie wedge-shaped backyard, which was larger in the back than the front made it look. The grass was as cooked as its kin in the front, but islands of green weeds seemed to be thriving. In the corner of the lot, an old metal shed stood, rusted to the point where I assumed divine intervention kept it standing. It seemed to have been there since the house had been built, or maybe several decades before. When I turned the corner of the house, I spotted a woman and child staring into the corner of the yard, their backs facing me. The woman wore a faded blue dress that fit her well. Tom had, it seemed, outkicked his coverage with her. I didn't want to startle them, so I offered a friendly hello to the pair. The kids started to turn, but the mother placed a hand on their shoulder and kept their heads facing away from me. I squinted along the tree line, trying to see what they were concentrating on, but I didn't see anything unusual, just wanting to be done with the job. I let them be and moved on. I turned another corner to the house's short side and spotted the grate leading to the crawl space. The grate looked as old as the shed, and I wasn't sure I would even need the screwdriver to open it. Hell, I was sure the thing would disintegrate in my hands as soon as I touched it. I crouched and was about to pull it off when I heard something rustling near me. I glanced back to where I had seen the mom and kid, but they were gone. I assumed I had heard them leaving. I pulled the grate off. I was right. No screwdriver necessary, and as I set it aside, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. It was the kid, a boy around 8 or so, but they weren't staring at me exactly. They were looking away from me, staring up at the roofline. I found it odd. Clearly, the kid wanted to talk to me but had turned their back on me. I coughed to let them know that I knew they were there, but they didn't respond. "Hey man, what's up there?" I said. "Nothing nice," he said, still keeping their gaze away from me. "Oh," I said, "not going to hurt me, is it?" "Maybe," he said. Not the answer I was expecting. "What is it?" "They told me you'd know soon enough." As he said that, I felt something crawling across my hand. I pulled my hand away from the house and shook it. I saw a spider land in a pile of leaves and scurry away. I let out a nervous laugh. I'm not scared of spiders or anything, but the shock of being told some unseen thing was watching me and didn't look pleased, coupled with the sensation of something on my skin, was enough to justify a quickened heartbeat. I looked back at where the kid had been standing, but he was gone. I chalked it up to kids being little weirdos and went back to work. The faster I could get this installation done, the quicker I could go home and smoke a bowl. I let Kush be my guide. I put up my hood, turned on my small flashlight, and shimmied through the opening under the house. I know guys who've worked for the company for years and still dread going into a crawl space. Granted, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I don't mind either. The bugs can be a nuisance, but if you don't bother them, they tend to not bother you. Same with rats and mice. Raccoons, though, I crawl out and call animal control. Those little dudes are cute but nasty as all get out. My path today was nothing but cobwebs, so I was okay. I flashed my light around and saw where the cable line went up into the living room floor. My job here was to ensure the coaxial line's integrity was still good. If it had been chewed on or anything, I'd replace it. Sometimes, I just replaced it anyway, saving myself a potential job later down the line. I crawled over to where the line came in from the pedestal and started my once-over. I not only looked for any damage, but also ran the line through my hands to make sure my eyes didn't miss anything. I was under the dining room area when I heard that side door close. I stopped. Tom said something, but it was muffled. I wanted to be nosy, so I waited a beat to hear if anyone spoke back to him. Someone did. It was soft and quiet. I assumed it was the boy, and I didn't make out what they asked, but I did hear Tom's response. In a firm voice, he said, "No, not right now. Run along." There were footsteps over me that faded into another section of the home. Tom said, "He always wants to jump the gun. How many times do I have to tell him?" I suppressed a laugh at the last line. It's the official father's lament. I kept moving my hand down the line and didn't feel nicks along the cable. In fact, on closer inspection, the line looked almost new. I was planning to change it, but this looked like it had been installed last week. I could hear someone walk into the living room as I reached the spot where the line went through the house. Another pair of footsteps followed the first, and I heard a breathy but detached woman's voice ask, "Can we show our faces now?" I just told the boy no. "What makes you any different?" Tom said, an edge to his voice. A chill raced through my body. I knew those words, but this conversation made me feel like I spoke another language. "Can we show our faces?" Why would you not? Do you think he'll see us? "If I have my way," he said, not finishing that thought. "Leave me be. I must try to get some things done before he leaves. And you two keep bothering me." What did Tom mean to get some things done before I left? What did he have in mind? While trying to process all this, I heard something shuffle in the darkness just beyond my flashlight beam. I moved it around, trying to see the telltale glowing eyes of varmints, but nothing flashed back at me. I heard something shuffling again, this time down by my feet. I cocked my head as best as I could and shone the flashlight into that corner of the house, but again, there wasn't anything else down here but me and 1,000 spiders. I sighed and finished my inspection of the wire. As I turned to crawl back out from under the house, I heard somebody sneaking around on the floor above me. The wood groaned as the person moved slowly. I wasn't sure what they were doing, but they wanted to keep it a secret. A shadow fell over the pinprick of light from where the cable went into the house. Someone was standing over it. Can you hear them down there? Moving in the dark. It was the boy. They like the dark. Ooh, what are you saying? The little shadows, he said. They live down there. Do you hear them? This kid was creepy as hell. I can't hear you. Dude, I said, inching my body away from the wire. We can talk inside. They're going to get you. But that's okay, he said. It only hurts for a little bit, and then you're fine. Fuck. That. I had no desire to respond to that nightmare of a statement. I hastened my inchworming, heading back towards the open hatch. As I did, I heard more movement in the darkness around me. I tried to ignore it, but it was a fool's gambit. It was impossible to ignore. I was getting closer to the opening when I saw a pair of tiny legs walk in front of the hatch. It was the boy. How did he get there so quickly, and without me hearing him run on the floor? I didn't have time to run through the scientific method because the boy leaned down and placed the metal grate back over the hatch. Hey! Hey! I yelled. I'm still under here. The boy didn't stop. Instead, he placed a trash can in front of the grate, enshrouding the entire crawl space in darkness and trapping me inside. Hey! I need you to move that! I screamed. No response. I raised my fist as high as possible and punched the floor above me to hopefully get Tom's attention. That was a mistake. As I managed to punch straight into an old nail, I felt it puncture in between my knuckles. The pain was instant, and I let out a howl. I shook my hand and swore a blue streak. I reached up with my other hand, felt the tip of the nail I had managed to punch, and found a flat spot next to it. I banged hard on the floor and yelled again for some help. Nobody responded, not at first. Then I heard someone chuckle under the house. I couldn't locate where it had come from because it sounded like it was all around me. I swung my light around as best as I could, but didn't see anything. No glowing eyes. Nothing. I inched forward a bit, and someone laughed again. This time, it was to my right. I turned my light in that direction and saw a sudden flood of light fill the space under the house. What the hell? I said, my desire to leave overtaken by a desire to know what was unfolding next to me. A pair of kid legs dropped down from the hole in the floor. I realized then that the hole must be an interior crawl space. The kid had blocked off the metal grate and opened this hatch for some reason. While he dropped his legs down, he didn't move any further. Hey, you have to open that metal grate, I yelled. I don't want to be trapped down here. They told me they needed you, he said, followed by a slight chuckle. What the fuck are you talking about? I said, not caring that I was talking to a child. Open the goddamn grate! The shadows are approaching, he said, pulling himself back into the house. He placed the lid back on the hole, and I was trapped in the dark again. I cursed to myself and started pounding on the floor again. Hey, someone come help me! That's when I felt something run across my legs. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It didn't feel like the tiny claws of a passing rat. It was cold to the touch, but as it hit my skin, I felt a burn in my bones. It's hard to explain, but I felt both extremes simultaneously. Whatever it was, skittered off into the darkness of the other side of the crawl space. The kid started laughing again, which brought me back to reality. I army crawled as fast as I could to the grate. I balled up my fist and punched in the middle of the metal. The blow knocked the old nails out of the wall, and the grate broke up. I was about to push away the garbage can when it suddenly wheeled out of the way. I saw Tom's legs standing there. "You okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. I got out from under the house so fast that I left a me-sized dirt cloud in my place. Once out, I shook my body loose as if I had things crawling all over me. Tom watched but didn't say anything at first. We finally locked eyes, and he could see the rage, fear, and confusion on my face. He wisely waited until I spoke first. "What the hell is wrong with your kid?" He blocked me under there and taunted me from the indoor crawl space. "What are you talking about?" He told me the shadow people or something were watching, and then he blocked me under the house. Tom's face twisted up into confusion. I don't understand." "I can't make it any simpler." "Tom!" I screamed, letting unprofessionalism take root. "I don't have a kid." It hit me like an alley right cross. My vision got dizzy, and I struggled to catch my breath. I stared at his face, looking for the sign of a lie or a joke, but he was as stone-faced as an Easter Island statue. After a beat, I found my sense again. "I heard you talking to him in the living room when I was under the house." 1. I was on a phone call. 2. Are you spying on me? What the hell, man? I wasn't spying, and you weren't on the phone. I said, "I also heard you talking to your wife. She asked you if she could show her face or something." "I don't have a wife either." I shook my head. "I fucking saw them in the backyard. They were staring at the fence." Tom paused and cocked his head to the side. When he spoke, it was softly, trying to calm me down. Did you have a few drinks before the appointment? Or a pill or something?" "No judging. I know pillheads. I won't report you or anything. But I understand if you need to come back tomorrow with a clearer head." "I'm sober," I said, gritting my teeth. "But I know what I saw, what I heard." As the tree said to the lumberjack, "I'm stumped." Tom said, "You look a little flush. You want a bottle of water or something? I can show you I'm here all alone." My adrenaline had seeped out of my body, and I was starting to feel like myself again. I nodded at Tom, and he smiled. "I'll go grab you one. Do you want to come into the AC?" "No, I'm okay. I need to double-check the connection to the pedestal." "Sure, be right back," Tom said as he walked off. But I had no intention of checking the connections. I was going to check on Tom. I didn't believe him at all. Something weird was going on, and I needed to know what. As soon as he turned the corner around the house, I broke out my flashlight and headed back to the crawl space. I dropped to the ground and shone my beam into the darkness. Something had crawled on me, and I wanted to see what it was. I moved my light into every section of the crawl space, but saw no eyes glowing back at me. "If you're under there, call back." There was nothing. I was starting to feel like a paranoid idiot. I called out once again just to be sure, but again, nothing called back. I shut off my light inside. I started pushing myself back to my feet when I heard a faint woman's voice call out, "Can we show our faces now?" "Not yet." Someone hissed from the trees above me. I snapped my head up, expecting to see someone hanging on a branch over my head, but I just saw green leaves. "Can we show our faces now?" It was the boy. It sounded like he was on the roof. I shielded my eyes and glanced at the roof but didn't see him. "No, he's not ready yet," someone whispered in my ear. I snapped around, throwing a punch as I did, only to slam my fist into the fence. I felt one of my knuckles crack as it hit the wood, and the pain shot up my arm like lightning. Within seconds, my hand started to puff up, and blood dripped out the wounds. The boy chuckled again. It came from under the house. I looked down at the grate and saw his legs disappear into the darkness. "Hey!" I called and dropped to the ground. I pulled out my flashlight and shone into the darkness again. I was confident I'd see him, but he wasn't there. Nobody was. I sat up and felt goosebumps turn my arms into braille. I glanced over to the corner of the house and was surprised to see the disappearing hemline of the faded blue dress. I rushed over to the corner and didn't see the woman. I saw Tom with a bottle of water. "You okay?" "Where did that woman go?" I asked. my voice panicking. She was just here. Sir, do you need me to call your boss for you? You're starting to scare me. What's up with this house? Is it haunted? Tom started laughing. I hope not. I just moved in. I'd hate to have roommates again, especially ones who leave ectoplasm all over the place. As I stared at him, I saw the woman and the boy emerge from the other corner of the house. They looked up on the roof, their faces obscured by their hands and the sun. I pointed a finger at them and screamed, "They're right there!" Tom spun around and looked, but there wasn't anything there. He turned back to me, not sure what to say. Instead, he handed me the bottle of water. I gotta be honest, I didn't see anything. Drink the water. You might have heat stroke. I threw the bottle on the ground. I don't have fucking heat stroke. I have a man that's lying about these things. I got close to him. What did you have planned for me? Why do they keep asking to show their faces? I don't, he said, but I didn't stay to hear him finish his thought. I walked right past him and turned the corner of the house. As I did, I saw the blue hem disappear through the door that led to the kitchen. I followed right behind her. I walked into the house, which was as silent as a corpse. The woman and boy were nowhere to be seen. "Hello?" I called out. "I just saw you guys walk in here. Where are you?" The door behind me opened up. Tom walked in, his face reddening with anger. "You can't just walk into my house." I saw them walk in. "Where are they?" "I keep telling you, it's just me and you here. Now, if you want to finish your work." I walked away from him and headed toward the bedroom where I had seen the boy standing. I wanted to check that crawl space. The room was empty, not even a moving box in there. So finding the hatch that led under the house was easy. I went into the closet and pried the hatch open. Tom entered the room behind me, more confused now than angry. The boy was standing in this spot. I saw his legs. I spoke to him. He told me the shadows needed me for something. I glared down into the darkness under the house. Despite Tom's feigned declarations that there wasn't another person in the house, I knew he wasn't being honest. "Okay, I'm pretty sure you're back on pills and in the middle of a delusion," he said. "How did you know I had a pill addiction?" "The way you're acting. It wasn't a hard guess." "I'm sober, but I did have a problem with pills. I never told you. I don't tell anyone." Tom stood there, confused about how to answer. I stood up and stared him down. He looked away, but I didn't move my gaze. "Who are you? Who put you up to this? Was it Rory? He trying to get me fired?" Tom's shoulders sagged. "You got me," he said. "Rory hired me to get you in trouble. I'm sorry. He offered me free cable for a year and assured me you were a bad guy and, well, I'm weak." "That's really fucked." I stopped. "You're lying. Right now, you're lying. Why?" Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dash past the open crawlspace hatch. I turned to the hatch opening and then back to Tom. "Are you trying to stop me from looking in there?" He didn't respond. "What's under there?" "He is," he said. "The boy. He hides under there all the time. He has friends down there. The shadow people." Tom shrugged. "What he calls them. I call them a menace. Impossible to get my work done with them causing a racket." "What work?" "Things you'd never understand in a million years," he said. "Things beyond your brain's capacity to imagine. Things that will help usher in a new world. Your kind's time is coming to a close. My work represents the new order." I stared at him. I wasn't sure if I should run away or punch his lights out. Instead, I just spat out, "Bro, what the fuck?" "Can we show our faces now?" the boy called out from under the house. I looked down at the hatch and then back at Tom. He nodded toward the opening. "Do you want to see your future?" "Fuck it," I said. I got down, grabbed the sides of the opening, and lowered my head under the house. I kept my eyes closed for a second, assuming I'd either see something horrifying or something would hit me in the face. When nothing struck me, I opened my eyes. It was dark, and I couldn't make out anything. "There's nothing under here," I said. "Can we show our faces now?" said the boy from somewhere under the house. "Show him," Tom said. I sat back up, grabbed my flashlight from my pocket, and flipped it on. I looked at Tom. "If you try anything, so help me, God." Tom just smiled. I looked back down at the hatch and sighed. What was I doing? My internal alarms were going off and I was ignoring them. Curiosity had gotten me this far, but my fight instincts were starting to lose to my flight. No job was worth this. "Man, fuck this," I said, reversing course and standing. I turned to confront Tom, but he was gone. I hadn't heard him leave, but there wasn't a trace of him there. "Tom, where the hell are you?" He didn't respond, and I decided that I had hit my weird shit quota for the day. I closed the closet door and headed back into the living room to grab my gear. I'd call dispatch and tell them someone else had to come out and finish the wood floor cracked, splintered, and gave way when I put my weight on it. I fell through the floor and landed with a thud on the dirt in the crawl space. On the way down, I hit my ribs on a crossbeam and heard them crack and knock the wind out of me. As I lay on the dirt, writhing in pain, my lungs did their damnedest to find a breath. It couldn't, and my vision started to blur at the edges. For a fleeting few seconds, I envisioned my death on a dirty crawl space floor. It wasn't comforting. I rolled onto my back and finally took in a massive gulp of life-saving air. The blurring vision subsided, and all that remained was the aching pain of a busted rib. My muscles around my rib cage spasmed and pulled tight against my lungs. After the initial big breath, I could only take shallow gulps because the pain was searing. I lay there for a few seconds, collecting my thoughts, when I felt something skitter across my legs again. I kicked out of instinct but didn't hit anything. Instead, I heard the chuckling again. My flashlight had fallen out of my hand. I found it and turned it on. This time, I did see something. Pairs of eyes, dozens of them, watched me from the darkness that surrounded me. I never hoped to find a raccoon under the house more than I did at that moment. I knew whatever these things were, they weren't natural and they wanted to harm me. "Still want to know what they plan to do to you?" the boy asked from behind me. I turned around and shone the light where I heard the voice. The boy was lying on his stomach, his face looking down at the ground. All I could see at the moment was the top of his head. What's going on?" I said, the light bouncing from my trembling hand. "I can show you my face now," he said. He raised his head and the boy didn't have a face. He had the space for a face, but there were no features whatsoever, nothing but pale pink skin pulled tight across the front of his head. At that moment, the image of a wooden art figure came to me. What the ever-loving fuck? "Want to see something really scary?" the boy said, his lack of a mouth not stopping him from speaking. He raised himself onto the tips of his fingers and toes and started skittering toward me, laughing as he did. I clambered out of the crawl space as fast as my battered body could carry me. I got out of the hole and onto my feet and let out an ear-splitting scream. The woman in the blue dress was standing next to the hole in the floor, like the boy. She didn't have a face either, but I could feel her eyes on me, looking into my mind, into my soul. She stepped toward me, and I bolted for the front door. I whipped it open and was greeted by Tom standing there, blocking me. He grinned. "Leaving so soon?" "What the hell is going on?" I asked, checking behind me to see if the woman was still coming toward me. She was gaining quickly. "Can we show our faces now?" he asked with a laugh. I turned back to Tom and nearly had a heart attack. His face was gone. I could feel my heart beating in my ears. My legs were jelly, but I kept myself propped up. The human desire to survive can perform miracles. Tom reached out and pointed at a spot on the far side of the living room wall. I turned and saw 3 skinned human faces hanging from old nails. A man, a woman, and a boy. "Your turn to join us," Tom whispered, but the voice wasn't said out loud. It came from inside my own head. "We can always use another body around here." My brain clicked into action and sent an all-points bulletin to my limbs. The message was simple and actionable. Get the fuck going, you dope. I felt my hand ball into a fist and spun. It landed where Tom's nose would have been. It should have knocked him back, causing him to stumble and giving me time to run. But that didn't happen. Instead, his face pulled apart, letting my fist slide right through. It closed on my arm, trapping me. I yanked and yanked, but my arm would not dislodge from his face. I glanced back and saw the woman nearly next to me. The boy was climbing out of the hole, moving like a cockroach. I looked back at the wall and saw Tom's hanging face, silently laughing. Something about those silent laughs cut me to my core. They were laughing because Tom thought he had outsmarted me. He had beat me, that my face would soon be hanging on the wall next to theirs. I wasn't going to let that happen. I saw a loose brick on the walkway, and a plan flashed in my mind. I yanked hard, sending Tom stuttering forward enough for me to wrap my finger around the brick. I brought it up and sent it towards his face. As expected, the face parted again, and the brick flew through easily. But as soon as the face curtains pulled aside, I yanked my arm free. With my limb free, I took off in a mad sprint for my truck. I got inside and fumbled my keys as I tried to start the engine. Tom, the woman, and the boy stood together at the front door and watched as I got the van going and rocketed down the street. I drove like a madman for 10 minutes, trying to put as much space between me and the house as possible. I finally stopped at a gas station to collect my thoughts. I was jittery, and my mind was swimming, but I was also relieved. I had gotten out. I collected myself and called Denise to tell her I couldn't finish the installation at 981 Maple Street. I was going to suggest we cancel the order and not send another installer there. That's when the conversation took a turn I wasn't expecting. "Where have you been? You were supposed to be off an hour ago," Denise said when I called her. "I was trying to finish the install at 981 Maple, the one you sent me to. I didn't send you anywhere," she said. "With how insane Rory is being about overtime hours, I'm trying to keep everyone below the threshold." "What are you talking about? You called and asked me. You don't remember," I said, a bad feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. She gave me a nervous chuckle. "I swear I didn't. Are you feeling okay? You gotta come back. People are waiting for the van." "I can prove it. I have a record of you calling me on my phone," I said. I opened my call log, and my jaw dropped. There was no call from Denise. She was telling me the truth. But if she didn't call me, who did? "Rory wants to talk to you when you get in." I wouldn't mess around. "He seems pissed," she said before hanging up. "I haven't moved since." I wanted to write this down because I felt like it needed to be recorded. Something supremely fucked up is happening at 981 Maple Street. It nearly got me. It still might. To think, on any other typical day, a surprise conversation with my boss would be the scariest thing that could happen to me. Funny how seeing a faceless ghoul can prioritize your problems. If you're hired to do work there, turn it down. Trust me, it's not worth it. "Can we show our faces now?" they asked. "Fuck no," should be the only response. Story 2. I'm always chasing rainbows. When you were a kid and you saw a rainbow, did you ever want to try to get to the end of it? I bet you did. I did. Anyway, it wasn't the mythical pot of gold that tempted me. Wealth was too abstract of a concept at that age to dream about, and leprechauns were creepy little bastards. I just wanted to see what the rainbow looked like up close, and maybe even try to climb it. Of course, you can't get to the end of a rainbow because not only is there no end, but there isn't even really a rainbow. It's an illusion caused by the sunlight passing through raindrops at the right angle. If you did try to chase a rainbow down, it would move with you until it faded away. That's why chasing rainbows is a pretty good metaphor for pursuing a beautiful illusion that can never manifest as anything concrete. I bring all this up because I think it was that same type of urge that compelled me to chase down the effulgent one. It's not a perfect analogy. However, considering that I did actually catch up to the eldritch bastard. I first saw the effulgent one a little over 2 years ago. My employer, who happens to be an occultist mad scientist by the name of Eric Thorne, had tasked me with returning a young girl named Elifay to her village on the northern edges of the county. The people of Verklich village are very nice, but they're also an insular, Luddite cult who worship a colossal spectral entity they call the Effulgent One. I saw this titan during my first visit to Verklich, and more importantly, he saw me. He left a streak of black in my soul, marking me as one of his followers. I can feel him now, when he walks in our world. Sometimes, if I look towards the horizon after sundown, I can even see him. This entity, and my connection to him, is understandably something my employer has taken an interest in. I've been to Verklich many times since my first visit, and I've successfully collected a good deal of vital information about the Effulgent One. The Verklichen are the only ones who know how to summon him, and coercing them into doing so would only earn us his wrath. He's sworn to protect them, though I haven't the slightest idea of what motivates him to do so. Even though I can see him, I usually try not to look, to pretend he's not there. The Verklichen have warned me never to chase after him. Before Verklich was founded, the First Nations people who lived in this region were aware of the Effulgent One. Though they called him the Sky Strider, any of them that went chasing after him either failed, went mad, or were never seen again. I was out driving after sunset, during astronomical twilight, when the trees are just black silhouettes against a burnt orange horizon, when I sensed the presence of the Effulgent One. He was to the east, towering along the darkening skyline, idling amidst the fields of cyclopean wind turbines. I could see their flashing red lights in the periphery of my vision, and I knew that one of those lights was him. I tried to fight the urge to look, but fear began to gnaw at me. What if he was heading towards me right now? What if I was in danger and needed to run? Risking a single sideways glance, I spotted his gangly form standing listlessly between the wind turbines, his long arms gently swaying as his glowing red face bobbed to and fro. I exhaled a sigh of relief, now that I knew he wasn't chasing me. That relief didn't even last a moment before it was transformed into a dangerous realization. He wasn't just not chasing me. He wasn't moving at all. He was still. This was rare, and it presented me with a rare opportunity. I could approach him. I could speak with him. This wasn't a good idea, and I knew it. The Effulgent One interacted with his followers on his terms. If I annoyed him, he could squash me like a bug, or worse, much worse. But he had marked me as his follower, and I wanted to know why. If there was any chance I could get him to answer me, I was going to take it. "Hey Lumi," I said to the proprietary AI assistant in my company car, "play the cover of I'm Always Chasing Rainbows from the Has-Been Hotel pilot." With the mood appropriately set, I veered east the first chance I got. Almost immediately, I noticed that the highway seemed eerily abandoned. Even if anyone else had been capable of perceiving the Effulgent One, there was no one around to see him. I got this creeping sense that the closer I drew to him, I was actually shifting more and more out of my world and more into his. The wind picked up and dark clouds blew in, snuffing out the fading twilight and plunging everything into an overcast night. The Effulgent One didn't seem to notice me as I drew closer. He was as tall as the wind turbines he stood beside, his gaunt body plated in dull, iridescent scales infected with trailing fungus. The head on his lanky neck was completely hollow and filled with a glowing red light that dimly bounced off his scales. Seeing him standing still was a lot more surreal than seeing him when he was active, as impossibly large as he is. When he's moving, it just naturally triggers your fight or flight response, and you don't really have time to take it all in. But when he's just standing there, and you can look at him and question what you're seeing, it just hits differently. It wasn't until I started slowing down that he finally turned his head in my direction, briefly engulfing me in a blinding red light. When it passed, I saw that the Effulgent One had turned away from me and I was striding down the highway. Even though his gait was casual, his stride was so long that he was still moving as quickly as any vehicle, reasoning that if he didn't want me to follow him, he wouldn't be walking along the road. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator pedal and sped after him. That's when things started to get weird. You know how when you're driving at night through the country, you can't see anything beyond your own headlights? With no visual landmarks to go by, it's easy to get disoriented. All you have to go by is the signs, and I wasn't paying any attention to those. All my focus was on the effulgent one, so much so that if someone had jumped out in front of me, I probably would have killed them. I turned down at least one side road in my pursuit of the effulgent one. Maybe 2 or 3. I'm really not sure. All I know for sure is that I was so desperate not to lose him that I had become completely lost myself. He never looked back to see if I was still following, or gave any indication that he knew or cared if I was still there. He just made his way along the back roads, his blood-red searchlight sweeping back and forth all the while, as if he was desperately seeking something of grave importance. Finally, he abandoned the road altogether and began to climb a gently rolling hill with a solitary wind turbine on top of it. I gently slowed my car to a stop and watched to see what he would do. I had barely been keeping up with him on the roadways, so I knew I'd never catch him going off-road. If he didn't stop at the wind turbine, then that would be the end of my little misadventure. As I watched the effulgent one climb up the hill and cast his light upon it, I saw that the structure at the summit wasn't a wind turbine at all, but a windmill. It was a mammoth windmill, the size of a wind turbine, made from enormous blocks of rugged black stone. It was as impossible as the effulgent one himself. No stone structure other than a pyramid or ziggurat could possibly be that big, and the windmill barely tapered at all towards the top. Its blades were made from a ragged black cloth that reminded me of pirate sails, and near the top I could see a light coming from a single balcony. When the effulgent one reached the hill's summit, he not only came to a stop but turned back around to face me, his light illuminating the entire hillside. Whether or not it was his intention to make it easier for me to follow him up the hill, it was nonetheless the effect, so I decided not to squander it. Grabbing the 1,000-lumen flashlight from my emergency kit, I left my car on the side of the road and began the short but challenging trek up the hill. I honestly had no idea where I was at that point. Nothing looked familiar, and the overgrown grass seemed so alien in the red light. The way it moved in the wind was so fluid it looked more like seaweed than grass. The clouds overhead seemed equally otherworldly, moving not only unusually fast, but in strange patterns that didn't seem purely meteorological in nature. With the effulgent one's light aimed directly at me, there was no doubt in my mind that he had seen me, but he still gave no indication that he cared. The closer I drew to him, the more I was confronted by his unfathomable scale. I really was an insect compared to him, and it seemed inconceivable that he would make any distinction between anthropods and arthropods. He could strike me down as effortlessly and carelessly as any other bothersome bug. I approached cautiously, watching intently for any sign of hostility from him, but he remained completely and utterly unmoved. The closer I got to him, the harder I found it to press on. From a distance, the effulgent one is surreal enough that he doesn't completely shatter your sense of reality, but that's a luxury that goes down the toilet when he's only a few strides or less from stomping you into the ground. His emaciated form wasn't merely skeletal, but elongated, his limbs, digits, and neck all stretched out to disquieting proportions. His dull scales now seemed to be a shimmering indigo, and the fungal growths between them pulsed rhythmically with some kind of life. Whether it was with his or theirs, I cannot say. There were no ears on his round head, no features at all aside from the frontwards-facing cavity that held the searing red light. As I slowly and timidly approached the windmill, he remained by its side, peering out across the horizon. I turned to see what he was looking at, but saw nothing. I immediately turned back to him and craned my neck skywards, marveling at him in dumbstruck awe. I'd chased him down so that I could demand why he had marked me as one of his followers. But now that I had succeeded, I was horrified by how suicidally naive that plan now felt. Many an internet atheist has pontificated about how, if there were a god, and if they ever met him, they would remain every bit as irreverent and defiant and hold him to account the same as any tyrant. But when faced with a being of unfathomable cosmic power, I don't think there truly is anyone who wouldn't lose their nerve. So I just stood there, gaping up at the effulgent one like a moron, with no idea of what to do next. Fortunately for me, it was then that the effulgent one finally acknowledged my presence. Slowly, he turned his face downwards and cast his spotlight upon me, holding it there for a few long seconds before turning it to the door at the base of the windmill. I glanced up at the balcony above and saw that it aligned almost perfectly with his head. Evidently, he wanted to meet me face to face. Nodding obediently, I raced to the heavy wooden door and pushed it open with all my might. The inside was dark, and I couldn't see very well after standing right in the effulgent one's light. But I could hear the sounds of metal gears slowly grinding and clanking away. When I turned on my flashlight, the first thing I was able to make out was the enormous millstone. It moved slowly and steadily, squelching and squishing, so that even in the poor light I knew that it wasn't grain that was being milled. The next thing I saw was a flight of rickety wooden stairs that snaked up all along the interior of the windmill. Each step creaked and groaned beneath my weight as I climbed them, but I nonetheless ascended them with reckless abandon. If a single one of them had given out beneath me, I could have fallen to my death, and the staircase shook back and forth so much that sometimes it felt as if it was intentionally trying to throw me off. When I reached the top floor, I saw that the wind shaft was encased in a crystalline sphere etched with ley lines and strange symbols. Though I was briefly curious as to the device's purpose, it wasn't what I had come up there for. Turning myself towards the only door, I ran through and out onto the upper balcony. The effulgent one was still standing just beside it, his head several times taller than I was. He looked out towards the horizon and pointed an outstretched arm in that direction, indicating that I should do the same. From the balcony, carved as if it was made of two intertwining gargantuan rose vines, with a stained glass roof that made it look like a rose in full bloom. The spire was surrounded by many twisting and shifting shadows, and I could perceive a near infinitude of superimposed potential pathways branching out from the spire and stretching out across the plains. The effulgent one reached out and plucked at one of the pathways running over us like it was a harp string, sending vibrations down along to the spire and then back out through the entire network. I saw the sky above the spire shatter like glass, revealing a floating maelstrom of festering black fluid that had congealed into 1,000 wailing faces. It began to descend as if it meant to devour the spire. But as it did so, the spire pulled in the web of pathways around it like a net. The storm writhed and screamed as it tried to escape, but the spire held the net tight as a swarm of creatures too small for me to identify congregated upon the storm and began to feed upon it. But the fluid the maelstrom was composed of seemed to be corrosive, and the net began to rot beneath its influence. It sagged and it strained, until finally giving way. A chaotic battle ensued between the spire and the maelstrom, but it hardly seemed to matter. What both I and the effulgent one noticed the most was that the pathways that had been bound to the spire were now severed and stained by the black bile, drifting away wherever the wind took them. The effulgent one caught one of them in his hand and tugged it downwards, staring at it pensively for a long moment. That didn't actually just happen, did it? I asked meekly. I waited patiently for the effulgent one to respond, but he just kept staring at the severed thread. But it's going to happen, or it could happen. A slow and solemn nod confirmed that what he had shown me had portended to a possible future. That's why you marked me as your follower then, isn't it? I asked. You needed someone other than the Verklichen, someone who's already involved in this bullshit and can help stop it from deteriorating into whatever the hell you just showed me. If Eric had picked anyone else to go to Verklich that night, or hadn't asked me to stay for the festival, it wouldn't have been me. It didn't have to have been me. His head remained somberly hung, and I hadn't really been expecting him to respond at all to my outburst. Elif, he liked you, he said in a metallic, fluid voice that sounded like it was resonating out of his chest rather than his face. I would not have chosen you if she hadn't. He twirled the thread in between his fingers before gently handing it down to me like it was a streamer on a balloon. I hesitantly accepted the gesture, wrapping as much of my hand around the spectral cord as I could. The instant I touched it, a radiant and spiraling rainbow shot down its length and arced across the sky. When it reached the chaotic battle on the horizon, it dispelled the maelstrom on contact. banishing it back into the nether and signaling in biblical fashion that the storm had passed. The other wayward pathways were cleansed of the black bile as well, and I watched in amazement as they slowly started to reweave themselves back into an interconnected web. But what does this mean? What do I actually have to do to make this a reality? I asked. The effulgent one reached out his hand and pinched the cord, choking off the rainbow and ending the vision he had shown me. A reality? He asked as he held his palm out flat and adjacent to the balcony. It's already a reality. All you need to do is make it yours. It seemed to me that I wasn't likely to get anything less cryptic than that out of him, so I accepted the lift down. He took me down the hill and set me down gently beside my car before setting off out of sight and beyond my ability to pursue him, even though my GPS wasn't working. The moment I was sitting in the driver's seat, the autopilot kicked in and didn't ask me to take control until I was back on a familiar road. I know that windmill isn't just a short drive away, and I'll never see it again unless the effulgent one wants me to. I don't think I can say I'm exactly happy with how that turned out, but I suppose I accomplished what I set out to achieve. I know what the effulgent one wants of me now, and why he chose me specifically. If it had been all his decision, I think I'd still be feeling kind of torn about it. But knowing that I've been roped into this because of Elifi makes it a lot easier to bear. And I did actually manage to catch a rainbow. I just needed a giant's help to reach it. Story 3. Rabbits don't run fast enough. A postal carrier, that anonymous stranger who knows your first, middle, and last name. They know if you're married, single, or divorced, if you're struggling to pay the bills, called to jury duty, or how well you're liked by the amount of Christmas cards you receive. They know more than they should, and yet we know nothing about them. That never bothered me until my new postal carrier introduced himself with a complaint about a non-existent problem. One evening I came home from the office, and as I was launching my briefcase up into the air, aiming for the couch, and loosening my tie, I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door, and standing on the front porch with his arm extended was the postal carrier holding a piece of paper. Was he new? Didn't seem familiar, but then again, all I ever saw of the postal carrier was a shadow sitting in a tiny truck. He was covered in dark, matted hair. I could see neither the skin on his arms or legs. The pale pigment of his skin revealed only under his grey eyes above a thick, long beard and mustache. He handed me the piece of paper. It was a form with a check mark by one of many categories of complaint, of which I was accused of parking in front of the mailbox. On the very bottom was penciled, "Please kindly move your vehicle from in front of the car." It was a strange request since I never parked on the street. In fact, I never parked in the driveway. I always put my baby in the garage. "But I'm not parked in front of the mailbox," I explained. He simply flashed his pearly whites and walked away. The very next afternoon, the doorbell rang again. It was him, with another piece of paper in hand. "This is ridiculous. I'm not parked in front of the mailbox." "Holy shit. I'm not even parked outside." He grunted and shook his head no and pushed the note into my stomach. I grabbed the piece of paper. This wasn't a form, but lined paper with a note. "This neighborhood sure does have a lot of rabbits." "Jerry!" "You must be a very lucky guy." Confused, I handed him back the letter. "Jerry." Great. He knew my name. Well, of course he knew my name, but just to see evidence of it, that unnerved me. "Yeah, well, I don't know about lucky," I said as I tried to turn away. "Why are rabbit feet so lucky?" he asked in a barely audible whisper. "What? Rabbit feet?" He cleared his throat. "Is it an award for catching them? Is the luck in their belly at first, and then it just kind of sinks down into their feet? Seems a little weird to me. So, if I catch a rabbit and cut its foot off, how long will that luck last?" "I got to go," I tried to answer. "I bet it's only for about a week. I mean, they're real easy to catch. Doesn't seem right you would get much luck for such an easy task." He was excited about the topic and unwilling to stop the conversation, so I abruptly walked into the house and shut the door behind me. I could hear him still talking for a bit before he finally realized I wasn't there. "Okay, Jerry, we'll talk tomorrow. See ya, buddy." I watched through the door light as he walked back towards the mail truck. I like Jerry. That was a good talk. He don't know much about rabbits, though, he said to himself. For a third day in a row, the doorbell rang. I refused to answer the door and stayed upstairs in my room. He was a stubborn carrier, that anonymous whoever standing on my front porch. He rang the doorbell for over an hour. When he finally decided to quit on the doorbell, he stepped out into the front yard and yelled up at my bedroom window. "Okay, Jerry, we'll talk tomorrow. I left you something on the front porch. It's a whole lot of luck. Should last you about 3 months." I heard the truck door shut and the engine fade away into the distance. I pulled the shade down to make sure he was nowhere around. I saw that the truck was gone, so I made my way downstairs. Outside on the front porch was a green plastic tote with a flip-top lid. Flies were buzzing in and out of the partial opening where the two sides of the lid did not fit tightly. I could see dried blood on either side of the tote. I searched around the yard and found a stick. I took the stick, forced it into a small opening and lifted open the lid. The tote was filled with severed rabbit's feet, what looked to be the remains of a whole bunch of rabbits. There on top was a piece of paper that read, "Jerry, I like you. Here's some luck. Hope it lasts a long, long time. Rabbits are so slow. It's funny. Why are they lucky? But if that's the rule, your friend." The bottom of my throat bulged with the contents of my stomach. I vomited into the tote, not so much out of disgust, but out of fear. I went inside and called the police. The police came and took my report, along with a detective that wanted a statement. Detective Fletcher had a few questions. It wouldn't take long. What did this man look like? I explained to the detective as much as I could remember, but felt it a little unnecessary since he worked for the post office. How hard could it be to apprehend him? "No, this guy doesn't work for the post office. Your postal carrier is on vacation this week. There was a report of a stolen mail truck, but we haven't tracked it down. Seems like the carrier filling in runs earlier in the day. This other sick fella came afterward. You guys are going to catch him, right?" "Well," he shrugged his shoulders. He then pulled out a card and handed it to me. "If you remember anything else, give me a call. Otherwise, call 911. Not feeling very confident with the detective's answer, I decided to buy a gun. I found a pawn store on Dickerson Road and bought a small caliber revolver. Being that I had never owned a gun, or shot one for that matter, I resolved to get to the firing range and practice. But instead I tossed it unloaded into my nightstand and forgot all about it. Months passed and the regular postal carrier resumed his route. Mike was his name. I forced myself to get to know him. I owed it to him, and I was thankful that he wasn't a rabbit-obsessed loon. He was rather confused by my unwarranted admiration, but we got along well. Mike had gone to Panama City Beach the week of my strange visitations. He had bought some bright yellow socks with palm trees embroidered across the seams. He wore them every Friday as a reminder that he now had less than a year before his next trip to the beach. Man, I wish I was back on the beach, but I wouldn't feel right leaving you with my substitute. I hear the US post office will hire anybody. Maybe next time I'll leave you a rabbit foot for protection," he would often say, never realizing that he had said it to me numerous times already. I would always laugh, even though the joke had long run its course. Yet, I felt safe with him around. Everything was fine and right until that November. Thanksgiving was 2 weeks away, and I was getting ready for a trip back home to visit my parents. By the end of the night, I was exhausted from packing, planning, and the general chaos of holiday maneuverings. I laid down on the bed to take a load off my feet, and unintentionally fell asleep. I was awakened by something landing on my chest. The lights were still on, so it didn't take my eyes long to focus. There, standing at the end of my bed, was the crazy, fake, not-so-real postal carrier. The hair on his body had grown long and hung in twisted, filthy knots. His eyes were dark red and set deep under his protruding brow. He flashed his teeth, but this time there were long incisors situated on both his upper and lower jaws. "I thought you would like the luck I gave you." He struggled to speak through his fang-fitted mouth, but maybe it wasn't enough. "My gift was not so good, so I got you something better." I pulled my eyes away from him and looked down at my chest. It was a severed human leg wearing a bright yellow sock with Panama City Beach embroidered across the seam. I shoved the leg off of me and onto the floor. "Don't do that," he admonished. "I worked hard for that." He fought real hard. "That kind of fight back has got to be worth a lot of luck." He lumbered over to the side of the bed, picked up the leg, and tossed it on my lap. I quickly moved to the other side of the bed. This offended him. He growled and hunched over in an intimidating stance of defiance. "Jerry, you make me confused. Why don't you like my gift?" "I do. Believe me, I do. I appreciate the gift." "And the pretty sock?" he added. "Yes, and the pretty sock." I slowly reached over and pulled open the nightstand drawer to get the gun. He saw what I was doing and hurried around to the other side of the bed to accost me. I pulled the gun out and aimed, but there was nothing but a click. I had forgotten that the gun was empty. "Jerry tried to kill me," he bellowed in anger. No, I was just getting my gun to go hunt rabbits with you. I like the yellow sock, but you still got to get rabbits for luck. Human feet just have a very little amount of luck. I don't know why, but for some reason rabbits are magical, and they got a lot of luck stored inside them. You said I didn't like your first gift, but that's not true. Man, that was the best time of my life. I had all kinds of good luck flowing around me. Thank you. Now, I need more." "Really, Jerry?" "Yes. Now I want to show you a special place where there are lots of rabbits. So many, in fact, they fill up a whole field. You can just step out and pick one up without even chasing or shooting it." I convinced my bestial antagonist to wait outside while I got the car out of the garage. I told him that we had to drive across town to get to the field. I opened the garage door and backed out. I was hoping he was in the driveway so I could run him over. But the goon was waiting in the yard. He opened the door and hopped in the passenger seat. He smelled awful, like a wet dog, and his foul essence exuded throughout the interior of my car. I feared I would never be able to wash the stench out of the seat fabric. His labored breathing was loud and obnoxious. I was ready to be rid of him. I drove over 2 hours to the next county, deep in a rural swath of hills and patchy forests. I spotted a dirt road to the left and turned down it. "This is it." I stopped the car. "Where are all the rabbits?" "It's on up the road, but we got to get out and walk from here." He looked over at me with a quizzical look. "Well, go on. I just got to get something out of the trunk. You're going to miss out on all that luck." We both got out and he walked on ahead as I walked around to the back of the car. He looked back, but I motioned him to move forward. I opened the trunk to complete the ruse. As soon as he was a good distance up the road, I closed the trunk and jumped in the car. I reached over and shut his door as well, pushing the button to activate the door locks. He hadn't noticed anything at all was awry. I was tempted to slowly roll up on him and then run him over, be done with the threat of him forever. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I put the car in reverse and slowly backed out onto the road. At that point he turned and ran towards me, wailing like a child, begging me not to leave him. I put the car in drive and sped off. As I turned onto the road that led to my neighborhood, I noticed an abandoned postal truck parked up at the elementary school. It was at that moment I realized a crucial mistake in what I had done. Although difficult, I should have finished him off. I should have put him down. I traveled a long distance to rid myself of this ragged old dog. Dropped him off in the country, in the middle of nowhere, as so many other irresponsible pet owners have done in the past. But unlike all those other pet owners, my damn dog can drive. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.